welcome to Bots and Beyond, your weekly dose of all things automation, mixing up end user, vendor and consultant experience to create your go-to podcast for bot-related insights. I am your host, Wayne Butterfield. Welcome back to Bots and Beyond. Wayne Butterfield here from ISG Automation, and it is again my pleasure this week to introduce my guest, Mr. Richard Clarke, and I know we're going to have a great discussion today about this week's episode, to chatbot or not. Great to have you on board, Rich. It'd be great to hear who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
So I'm Richard Clarke. I'm Managing Director of Custom Operations for Paddy Power Betfair, which is what I do today. I've been doing various jobs over the years, but predominantly focused on digital transformation. And I guess to keep it brief, the reason I do what I do is I think I've been quite passionate about wanting to change the way that customers experience customer service for about 15 years, from the sort of very first iterations of sort of live chat and RPA. I think there's just been lots and lots of examples where you see the industry not moving forwards as fast as it could do, and I just personally find it quite frustrating when there is more exciting experiences that we can offer customers. So it's a passion to sort of see things change for the better that sort of drives me on, and that's certainly the last few jobs I've had have been focused on taking a business that's got a very traditional way of doing things and really trying to sort of put it at the leading edge of the customer experience. So I guess that's me in a nutshell.
Brilliant. And I think that perfectly sets you up for your bot name. I'm going to call you the Diginator. I really struggled with this one because as I would say, as probably the most influential person in my career to date, there were so many potential names I could have given you. But you have literally digitized the customer service now of three major brands across the, I guess, UK and Ireland. And so the Diginator is the one I landed on eventually this morning. So Richard, thank you. We're going to get into loads of great topical questions. We're going to go from COVID related changes to bot related insights, team structures and the like. So loads of stuff that we can chat about today. I guess when we caught up previously, one of the things that I really cottoned onto was around some of the changes that you have seen with regards to the team makeup, your staffing strategies, etc. And as much as I guess we've tried to digitize customer service for, as you say, well over a decade, it's funny how a pandemic can suddenly change the way of working so quickly. Give us a few kind of insights into some of the changes that you've seen over the last 6 months.
Yeah, I think it's been quite interesting just seeing, obviously everybody's had to adapt to a completely different normality, whether that's personally or, the roles that we play in work. For me individually, working from home is a massive change for me because I used to spend my working week traveling a lot. So it's really sort of shaken, the way I do things from a personal perspective. And there's lots and lots of positives for me around what that means from family time and so on. But I think inside work, you can see many companies have had to adjust to, taking their traditional contact center that may be sort of, voice led, and quickly realizing that, if they have to have their workforce working remotely, how suitable is voice if your customer service agents are, in a room somewhere in a shared house or whatever. It's a sort of reality of having to adjust to that, which many companies have been through a fairly sharp, realignment process. I think for us, luckily, because we'd already been on that sort of transformation journey, we took, maybe a year ago, the decision to sort of transition fully to digital only. And that made it a lot easier for us to, move to a fully remote way of working for our frontline staff. And that's not to sort of downplay how big a shift that was. For us as a company, we'd never had our staff in frontline customer service, at least, working from home at all. So to sort of make that happen and for us it happened in about 4 days was a huge shift. But it was really helped by the fact that we'd already taken the decision to sort of move everything to digital, because it's a lot easier to sort of manage, the background noise in the home or whatever, if you're in a sort of digital medium, and also just the realities of kids wandering in the background and things like that. It's a lot easier to deal with that if you're having a kind of a live chat conversation or a messaging conversation versus trying to solve something real time on the phone. So I think we really benefited from our digital strategy, and I think what I've seen is many companies have used that as a great opportunity to sort of shift their ways of working in that way. And I think we've actually seen some really big benefits from remote working. And you think about the way that contact centers often have to plan. You're often trying to fit a set of shifts that are fixed, set number of hours a day to a inbound contact pattern that's driven by some external factor. And for us as a company, that's sporting events and so on. It's a lot easier to staff that if you're not having to justify somebody's commute to work and to give them a fixed shift. So I see some real benefits in being able to offer people the flexibility that they want, and deliver a better experience to the customer by being able to match that sort of supply and demand more successfully in a remote world. So for all the sort of pains and negativity and real significant challenge that COVID is bringing we parts of society, I do think at the end of it there will be some positives for the contact center world at least. That we can all look back on and say, that actually helps us to sort of, deliver a different way of working with people that is win-win.
I think one of the things, on top of this is, as you digitize customer service from a manual perspective, it's often seen as the gateway to kind of chatbots, to conversational AI as well. So I guess as well as some of the benefits that you've seen in the digitization of customer service, and you're certainly not the first person to say that actually the working from home improvements have not just been in kind of employee satisfaction, but there's actually, I was speaking with PV Karnan over at 247.ai, and he was saying how his customer KPIs had increased, that they'd actually been more efficient. So loads of great things around the KPIs. And that roadmap, I guess, towards the automation of those digital contacts, I guess that's the next wave, right? And that's you don't stop at the digitization. You move. You mentioned RPA before. We'll talk about conversational AI now. I guess talk to us a little bit about that next step and your thinking around what happens once you've shifted into some of those digital messaging channels.
Yeah, I think some of these things are linked, right? So, taking remote working as a sort of example, lots of people worry about people being productive when they're, working remotely. And I think there's a bit of a crossover between, the conversation around, chatbots and conversational AI and productivity, because you've got to look at the capabilities in their sort of broadest sense. I actually really don't like the term chatbot. I think that many people have experienced, chatbots, 5-6 years ago, have got a very sort of negative view of what the art of the possible is. So we've actually sort of coined the phrase sort of virtual assistants, and the reason for that is that I think that the experience that we're looking for is something that has some level of intelligence that offers the customer, some benefits, rather than just being able to sort of, transactionally interact with a customer and, maybe add a small amount of value. So I do think that, digital is a natural entry point to conversational AI, because it is so much easier to deploy the capabilities that you've got into a text-based conversation than it is in a voice-based conversation. But I can give you my personal view on sort of the best way that I've found to sort of deploy this capability, and the sort of approach that I've taken has been to make sure that the bot is part of every conversation. So it's not about being selective about where it lives and where it doesn't live. We as a company have utilized that capability as the entry point. So the first thing that our customers speak to is a digital assistant. We've then got a choice to make based on who the customer is and what the customer needs about how involved that digital assistant is. In many cases, that digital assistant will just be quickly gathering some information that our human agents need to make sure that the customer gets from the start of the journey to the end of the journey in the most efficient way possible. So that is the extent of the journey for many of our customers using our digital assistant. In other particular journeys where we think that the conversational AI tools can offer a better experience, that digital assistant will go further. So if it's a super transactional conversation or conversational need, we may as well have the digital assistant just answer that very, very quickly. But it's important that the answer it gives is contextually rich, personalized, and relevant. Otherwise, it's just acting like a bit of an FAQ. So I think that to me is the real difference between chatbot and digital assistant. Is it's got to understand the context, it's got to understand the individual customer's needs, and it's got to add value. And really, what I'm saying there is that it needs to be connected into other parts of your business's ecosystem, back-end services. Otherwise, it's just offering a kind of scripted response, and customers quickly see through those things. You can see in journeys where we've tested, a contextually aware assistant versus a basic assistant. You can see a massive difference in the customer experience and how much value that journey adds to the customer. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight.
Absolutely, and I think the contextual nature and the improvements that you've seen, I think really struck home. And I know there's some great examples of where you've run those kind of A/B tests between scripted answer and not. And it's kind of like I don't know, asking a bot what your opening hours are, and you just give them a particular script, the kind of thing that you scraped off your website, versus today's Monday. On Monday we don't open till 10 o'clock. We close at this point. It's very contextual. It's based on information such as the day of the week. And if you kind of extrapolate that across some of your other query types, you can absolutely see why that answer is more likely to keep the customer eye in journey versus this is just rubbish. I want to speak to a person. So that's great. One thing you mentioned was around to chatbot or not, going back to the kind of episode here, you mentioned a number of journeys that you want to look at end to end, and you mentioned a number of journeys that you want to be involved in, but you're not necessarily going to do anything other than find the right person to deal with those queries. Have you got any view on like how many you want to be all over versus not? And I guess there often is a limit. You got any kind of advice on what that limit should be, and what would you say are the right type of journeys to be considering for that pool of bot containment?
Yeah. So if you think about the sort of extreme end of that digital assistance capabilities, the conversations where you want it to do the most it can to contain that conversation, deliver a great experience, and then a human not be required. I think the sort of way to look at that is to think about, in your business, how many conversation types are sort of relatively transactional in nature, relatively high volume, and certainly target the things that are not hugely complex, that are not highly sensitive or emotive. Conversations where a human being, really is essential to, calm a customer down or, adopt the right tone, etc. If you sort of do that analysis, and I've done this in a number of companies, you tend to find that there are sort of, between, 10 and 30 kind of broad topics that fit that criteria of, high volume, repeatable, relatively transactional. But when I say transactional, I don't mean simple. It just means that they are things that follow a sort of predetermined path. You can very quickly limit the number of journeys that you need to sort of design very deep experiences for to that finite number of things. And then what that does is it means that the customer sees this digital assistant doing a lot of helpful things when it can help, and then being frictionless when actually their goal is to connect the customer to somebody that can help them with their more complex, more sensitive, more nuanced question that they've got. I think one of the things that's changed in the last few years in the sort of conversational AI world is that it's a lot easier now to sort of actually understand what the customer's intent is in detail, and not just sort of have a very broad kind of it's a password reset. You can get very sort of detailed on understanding what the customer's intent is. That's actually almost the easy bit now. The tricky bit is designing that conversational journey so it works well with the customer, and making sure that you're not trying to intervene or get in the way of that experience when really you shouldn't be, and you've got very little value to add. And I see a lot of companies doing that, where they just deploy a bot to try and keep the customer away from their contact centers and try and keep them contained. Ultimately, that won't work. Customers, as you said, are pretty smart and quickly realize whether something's helping them or not. And most customers, in my experience, their goal isn't to speak to somebody. Their goal is just to get their problem solved. And if you can solve their problem in a way that's kind of quick, efficient, and a positive experience, they will absolutely engage with kind of conversational AI as a tool. But if your goal is to sort of make it hard to reach your contact center, put barriers in the way, they'll quickly figure out that they want to bypass it and find whatever the rule is that you've built in that says get me an agent or whatever. They'll figure that out. People are pretty smart.
Brilliant. And one of the things you mentioned there was around the conversation design. Now, I think we could have, and in fact we will have at some point, an entire episode, I think, dedicated to conversational design, because it's a real skill, it's a real art. It's obviously a skill that most organizations don't just have. So I guess this kind of brings me on to skills, team setup. Like, what are your top tips? I mean, you've done this numerous times now. Where are those nuggets of information around who you need to be looking for? What are the skills that you need to be finding either in your organization or bringing in order to make your conversational AI team a success? You got any nuggets there, Rich?
I think it's a brilliant question, because if you go back 5 years, none of these roles existed. These are new skills, as you say, they're new skills. And what I found is that the real difficult part of this is the art of the conversation. And it is an art. It's definitely not a science. It's something that people need to feel their way into. What I found to be particularly helpful is having people who are familiar with speaking to customers, who are familiar with your processes and policies, and the way customers communicate, be fully involved in that conversational design process. And I think that's absolutely critical. If you sort of hand off conversational AI to the technology department and ask them to build you a bot, you'll get a bot. I think that's pretty clear from many companies that have not done a good job at this. I think if you want to get the right experience, it's really, really important to involve the experts, and by experts I mean frontline staff. And if you can involve them in the process, you're much more likely to get the right experience for the customer. And I think what really helps that is selecting the right platforms and tools to work with. If you choose the right tool, and there are literally thousands of these platforms available nowadays, and they sort of vary from something which is a code base all the way through to a kind of simple GUI that anybody can build a kind of blocked journey against, and everything in between. I think if my personal view is that make the tools help the people that are designing the conversations, rather than try and pick the cheapest tool or the tool that the technology people are most comfortable with. And I'm not going to advertise a particular technology, because there are many great examples now out there, but my personal preference is making that product simple, choosing one of those products that means that people that are non-technology experts can participate in the process fully. That to me has been key, to make sure that the journeys flow, because it's very easy to design a journey that doesn't flow, or has dead ends, or doesn't cover off an eventuality, and doesn't sound like the brand, all those things. So that's not to say this is a kind of customer service driven initiative on its own. As I said at the start, I think it's really important that this technology has context. It's aware of the customer's individual parameters, and for that reason, you have to involve people from your technology teams with making sure that it has that intelligence. So I think it's a real kind of group effort, but has to be led by people from within the sort of customer experience, customer service kind of community, to make sure it's delivering the right outcomes.
I think it's a really topical conversation, and does align very much to automation in general. The entire industry is moving towards low code, no code, and that is specifically to get away from it only being an IT initiative. And conversational AI is certainly no different. One of the things I know you're incredibly passionate about, and certainly, one of the things that, I followed in your coattails on is around adoption of these new channels, these new capabilities. Now, I know we could talk about this for hours, but adoption of any new channel, any new capability is obviously going to be key to its success. Now, you've done this numerous times. I mean, you've literally changed Paddy Power from predominantly voice. I'll say, let me guess, 90% plus voice to a single digits in non-digital interactions. That needs adoption. It needs an adoption plan. It needs your customers to be willing to come on that journey with you, and that's just not even including the kind of conversational AI stuff. Like, what are your top tips for adoption? Because I think it is a undervalued component of any digital transformation.
If you build these journeys to be effective and to be for the customer rather than to tick a kind of a commercial business goal, if it's for the customer and it's effective and it's efficient, customers will adopt it. And we've seen that during COVID, and I've seen that in many companies where we've trialed something and then scaled something. Customers will use it. There's always going to be a cohort of customers that prefer voice or prefer email or whatever their preferred channel is based on historical experience. You can never cater to the everybody, but having a strategy that's sort of mostly digital, and has the option for those legacy options as well, is much better than sort of starting the other way around, being mostly traditional and offering the option of digital as well. So I think it's a fine line. I think you've got to have a very clear strategy. I think you've got to be bold. And often when you're early in the life cycle of some of the newer technologies, it's quite hard to do that because there is no sort of reference point to say, well, I've seen this work over here, and therefore I know that this will work, and here's my business case. I think it's often that's the hard time when you've got to have a belief that something's the right thing to do, but at the same time, I think being prepared to fail as well. I passionately believe that I'd rather try 10 things and 3 work and 7 fail than not try. Companies sometimes need an excuse to do something that they think is the right thing to do, but aren't brave enough to sort of drive the change. And I think COVID is, it is an excuse, but it's a necessary. Like, they've got no choice. They have to change because it's no service or change. So it's almost something that probably maybe they don't have the leadership to drive that change. Maybe they do have the leadership, but they it's too risky, etc. Now there's no choice. They've got to do something different because the old way of working doesn't work anymore. I think that's the situation, really.
Mm-hmm. Others have gone the complete opposite way, where they've turned off every other channel apart from voice, and then created this horrendous experience for their customers because they're not brave enough to to take advantage of the situation. They've actually gone back into their shell.
Is it not being brave or not being knowledgeable enough to know what options are? Because you take it for granted that yourself and people like me have been involved in this space for a long time, know what the art of the possible is. the vast majority, I think, of kind of, CEOs, this isn't their area of expertise. They only know what their, contact center heads tell them. And if those people have been 20 years in contact center, they may well be, passionately for the traditional way of doing things.
You
just got to, the companies have got to overcome. But the world is definitely changing. There's no doubt about it. If you look at the growth in the sort of share price of whether it's Zoom or whether it's companies offering kind of chat and messaging platforms, those companies have taken off, and I certainly would have loved the foresight to know that that was going to happen.
And to be fair, Rich, I know for a fact this is a topic that we could have discussed for a lot longer. I'd love to get you back, actually, at some point in the future, as I'm sure the audience would. So thank you.
My pleasure, as always, and I hope people find that useful in some way.
Thanks for listening to ISG Automation's Bots and Beyond podcast, your weekly dose of all things automation. See you next week for more news and views on RPA, intelligent automation, and AI.